Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and this is the late 2018 Vega 20 MacBook Pro. This is Apple's top-of-the-line MacBook Pro, although this one does not have the 4 terabytes of storage, it only has 1 terabyte. Now in this video, I've been using this for about a month or so, but I also did the unboxing when I first picked it up, and I just never published the video. So that's actually in this video, but if you don't want to see all of that, you can just click the link in the description where there's time codes and you can jump around to whatever we're going to look at. Everything from the unboxing to benchmarks to editing and some other things as well. So check that out down there if you'd like to see that, and let's go ahead and unbox it now. So this is actually the top of the line except for storage when it comes to the new 2018 MacBook Pro. So let me flip it over here. As you can see, it's the 15.4-inch Retina display. It's got the 2.9 gigahertz Core i9 6-core, 32 gigabytes of RAM, 1 terabyte of storage, and the Radeon Pro Vega card in it with 4 gigabytes of RAM. So this is probably the most expensive MacBook I've ever purchased. This is $4,250 before AppleCare, which is pretty absurd. So it better perform much better than my 2017 MacBook that's equivalent. Now, I did try using the Mac Mini, but that just wasn't going to do it for me because I like to be portable, and I have a monitor I like to connect to up here, and I had to use an eGPU just to get the performance I needed out of it. So let me go ahead and unbox this. So I got some of this wrapper undone here. Let's take this off. There's the wrapper. Let's open it up here. There we go. It's in space gray, just like the other one. And with this, I don't think you get a whole lot other than the computer. You've got a little bit of documentation here. Let's see what we've got. So we've got MacBook Pro, kind of a quick start guide here. And then we've got Apple stickers, like you get with everything, but they're not Pro or space gray, they're just white. And then we've got our wall adapter, USB-C. There is no extension cable for it anymore, just like there has been for a couple of years. And then USB-C to USB-C. So let's set this aside and set this up. Let's take this off here. And of course we have the newer 3rd generation butterfly keys, and it turns on as soon as you open it up. So I'll wait for that just a moment. Now I'm going to set this up as new so I can use it as my main editing computer, and we'll see how it compares to what I've got now and whether it's worth keeping or picking up for yourself or getting something different. Now, being that this is one of the newer MacBooks, it has the latest butterfly keyboard on it. It works fine for me. I don't mind it at all, but if you're someone that doesn't like this, it's going to be a pain for you, and if you want to type something, it can be a little bit clicky and noisy, but it's definitely more quiet than before, or at least a different noise. The trackpad is great. It's just like any other MacBook, and the touch bar is something I never use. In fact, I use it for that normal thing that you'd get with the current MacBooks without the touch bar. Volume, volume up, volume down, keyboard brightness, screen brightness, and that is it. The fingerprint sensor is really nice. It's definitely worth having, and that's it. I could go back to the regular one. I have no reason to use the touch bar, even with Final Cut Pro or anything like that. Now the display is really nice, and if I'm going to do anything like edit video or photos or anything like that, I turn off True Tone, and it's currently off, but let me show you what it does. With this background, you'll see here if I turn on True Tone, it will try and make this look more paper white, and I don't really want that when I'm going for color accuracy. And then again, if I turn on Night Shift, which is really nice for your eyes if you're looking at this at night and you really want it to not bother your eyes, it's fine, but when you're actually trying to edit, it's a bad idea because you'll see again, it's kind of more yellow. It takes the blue out of it. And while that may be a little bit better for your eyes at night, It's not great, again, if you're going for color accuracy. So the display is great, but it has those added features. Now, one of the great things is thermals are no longer an issue with this. You'll see here, this is iStat menu. We've got all the different thermals, and I'll show you some shots of this where it's actually using a lot of the processor and it's not throttling. Same goes for the GPU when it's using that new Vega 20 GPU. It just doesn't throttle anymore, and that's a really great thing. So let me show you something else that I thought was really impressive as well. And one of the things that's really impressive is this is Canon raw light recorded on this. This is recorded from a C200 camera on a CFast card, and it's plugged in directly to the MacBook itself, and you'll see these are the files, and these files are huge. This is 94.95 gigabytes. Let's go ahead and just create a new event. We'll just call it test event, and we'll leave the files in place. We're not going to replace them or copy them to the drive or anything like that. Let's just import those. You'll see we've got the little beach ball there. Takes a second. And here's the file itself. Let's create an event. We'll just call it test event, and we'll leave the resolutions alone. We'll hit OK, and then let's take this file and we'll drag it down into the timeline. And you'll see this is my file for the Pixel 3 XL, and we'll just play it in the timeline. It plays fine. It's playing directly off this CFast card. I'm not importing it or anything. I don't have to wait for it to render or anything. It's super fast, no problems there. And I do find that it works pretty well on the 2017 MacBook Pro, but sometimes it hiccups. Here, even with an external display, it doesn't seem to hiccup at all. You can go in here, color grade it to whatever you'd like. Change that, maybe bump the saturation. We'll mess with the exposure a little bit and just make it look correct. We'll make it full screen and we'll just play it back. After the LUT's been applied, everything's in place. We can just jump through the timeline. And if you've ever edited Cinema Raw Light using a CFast card, it's direct off the CFast card. Nothing special going on here. So that's pretty impressive to me. One thing that's really helpful is the 32 gigabytes of RAM that you get with this. Now you can see the CPU is kind of doing some background rendering in Final Cut Pro, but even with Final Cut Pro open, we have Pixelmator Pro open. We also have Tweetbot, Messages, Mail, Chrome, Safari, the App Store, iTunes, and Photos. And if we take a look at how much memory we're using about very little. There's 20 gigabytes free. We're using about 8 to 9 or so, and not very much. We're using maybe 12 gigabytes. We're still under 16 gigabytes that you'd use on the previous versions of the MacBook Pros maxed out. So it's doing really well managing all of these things at once. Oftentimes I'll actually export video using Final Cut Pro, and at the same time I'll be using Pixelmator Pro and have some other things open, maybe a video playing in the background. There's no issues, although those fans do spin up quite a bit. And then talking about external devices, using it with an eGPU is not recommended, at least in my experience. I find it to be far too buggy. It would lock up on me at least once a day when using an eGPU. And since the Vega 20 is fast enough, I don't really find that I need it too much. But there is a downside to that with the thermals, is the fans get really, really loud. And let me see if you can hear this. I'll just turn them up so you can hear them. I've got a little fan management thing here, max fan control. And if you want to turn them up, they spin up to 6,000 RPM now. We'll hit OK. And I find that at full processor use, when I'm really pushing this, editing video or compressing video, it's quite loud. So hear this for a second and just see what you think. So here is my decibel meter. It's just an app. I don't know how accurate it is, but this gives you an idea. This is me at my speaking volume. Currently I'm around 70 decibels. Let me stop talking so you can hear how loud this is. So around 50 dB or so, and it's fine for most things. If you're exporting, you're not really needing it to be too quiet, but just keep that in mind. It is quite loud, and it normally spins up to the full 6,000 RPM or just under when you're editing. So we'll just flip that back to auto. It goes to silent. But if I'm editing C200 raw light or Canon raw light, it definitely spins those up full speed while I'm editing the entire time. So it's not like one of the new Mac Minis or even the iMac Pro. So let's take a look at some of the benchmarks and how they compared to some other MacBooks as well. I ran Geekbench on 3 different Macs. My 2017 MacBook Pro, it's a fully spec'd quad-core 3.1 GHz Core i7, 16 gigs of RAM, and Radeon Pro 560 graphics. We also have the 2018 Mac Mini, fully spec'd out with a 3.2 GHz 6-core i7, 32 gigabytes of RAM, and its Intel UHD graphics 630, and then the 2018 MacBook Pro with the Vega 20 graphics. And you'll see how they can compare, and we'll do the same devices for each comparison. So the first thing is the 2018 MacBook scored 5,675, the Mac Mini was 5,670, and the 2017 MacBook Pro was 4,342. For the multi-core scores, we have 15,669 for the MacBook Pro from 2017. The 2018 Mac Mini scored 24,343, and the Vega 20 MacBook Pro scored 25,650. Now, the OpenCL test from Geekbench was a little bit different, with the 2017 MacBook Pro scoring 46,900. The 2018 Mac Mini scored 23,291, and the Vega 20 MacBook Pro scored 78,059. Now, let's move on to the metal test, and you can see it's very, very similar. 44,767 for the 2017 MacBook Pro, 25,344 for the Mac Mini, and for the Vega 20 MacBook Pro, 79,937. The next test I did involved exporting a 4K video using Final Cut Pro 10. I exported it in H.264 and deleted the render files each time before exporting to make sure that these were accurate. Now, as you can see, the Vega 20 MacBook Pro was the quickest with 13 minutes and 23 seconds. Coming in second was the 2017 MacBook Pro with 13 minutes and 58 seconds, so not that much slower. And then last is the 2018 Mac Mini with 15 minutes and 28 seconds. Now, I ran the same test, but exporting to H.265, since the T2 encoder on the newer 2018 MacBook Pros should speed this up a lot, and it certainly did. It exported in 7 minutes and 14 seconds, whereas the 2017 MacBook Pro exported in 15 minutes and 32 seconds, so it's a very big difference. The next test is Cinebench, so let me go ahead and open that up. Wait for it to load here. And we'll run the CPU test, and also we'll see what the CPU is doing here as we're doing it. It actually should spike when we're running the CPU test. So let's go ahead and run that. And if you look up here at the very top, you'll see the CPU is kind of spiked, and the temperature hits 100 degrees. So let's see what it does, and it's back down to 87 or 90. So that's good. It's keeping itself pretty cool. So the CPU test completed. We've got 1,113. Let's go ahead and run the OpenGL test. With OpenGL, we got 109.95 frames per second. So it did pretty good there. So again, CPU was 1,113. Now, when it comes to games, I don't really game on this. I edit video on this most of the time. So if it'll edit 4K video, Canon RAW Light, it'll do pretty much anything else. But here's some fun games I play. Of course, it's going to play those with no problems whatsoever and run them at decent frame rates. But if you really want a gaming machine, this is not the one to buy. This is too expensive for that. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. But let's take a look at the Heaven benchmark so you can see what that's like. So we'll open the Heaven benchmark, and let's just set it to extreme to see how it does, and let's click run, and we'll see what we've got. So up here is the processor speed, and you'll see different things like memory and things like that. We'll wait for it here, and it didn't go full screen, but it's running at a solid 29 frames per second right now in extreme, so that's pretty good, and much better than the previous generation or 2018 MacBook Pro. And again, you'll see it's not really using much of the CPU, but rather the GPU at this time. So you can see everything wired and what's running here, but it's running pretty well. Frames per second, 54.3. Right now it's at 60. So that's pretty solid. That's probably the best I've seen on any MacBook Pro ever. So it's doing a great job as far as that goes. So you'll see it's nice and smooth, no problems there. And that's in extreme. So let's do one more thing here. We'll change the settings. It's not in full resolution, so that wasn't the standard. And then let's see if we can hit full screen. Click OK. Let's change it to full resolution and see what we get. And there we go. I expected it to hiccup a little bit more. So we'll click close. And now we're down to 27 frames per second in full screen and at full resolution, which you would expect. You would expect it to drop quite a bit. So we're at 33 frames per second. It's doing pretty well, especially for a MacBook. So let's go ahead and quit this. And so I think you'll see that the benchmarks themselves are very impressive. Nothing really slows this down too much, and it's really made for editing video and music and doing really heavy applications, and hopefully with a little bit better GPU support. I was using it with an RX 580. It works fine, but it locks up for me regularly with Final Cut Pro, and that's even using it. There's a way you can force it to use the eGPU, and that's what I was doing, and it still doesn't seem to work really well for me all the time. Let's talk about battery life for a little bit. The battery life on this is just like any other MacBook Pro. If you're editing, it's going to go down to a couple hours. If you're doing just browsing the web, it'll last you 7 hours or so, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little bit less, depending on what you're doing. I never let it get down to that point where I don't just plug it in because I'm usually editing content. Now, after using the 2018 MacBook Pro for a month, it's definitely fast. It's great at multitasking, but I never used over about 16 gigabytes of RAM. So the 2017 models with 16 gigabytes of RAM seem to be okay. Even though that 32 is great to have as kind of a buffer overhead, I never used it, at least with Final Cut Pro anyway, and having multiple applications open. Now, as far as the price is $4,250 plus $375 for AppleCare plus tax, and that puts it around $5,000 or iMac Pro territory, or 5K iMac and MacBook Pro territory. You could get both of those things for the price of this. And using that is just, it's great to use, but when it's $5,000 for a laptop, and you can get an equivalent Windows laptop for about $2,500 with the same specs, from Razer or something like that, maybe even less, maybe a little bit more, depending on what we're looking at. It's kind of a lot of money for what it is. And using it with things like an external display, this LG back here, it has a lot of issues waking up from sleep, and I've found that to be true across multiple displays, and a lot of people have told me the same thing. In fact, some friends on YouTube have had the same experience, and one of them decided to get an iMac Pro because of it. They just couldn't deal with the MacBook Pro and its display issues from time to time. So there's definitely some issues there, and then the eGPU, in my opinion, as much as I want to like it, is useless for Final Cut Pro because it locks up every single day. Every time I use it, I have an issue with it locking up. It completely freezes. I'll unplug it with Thunderbolt and it seems to work again. So for whatever reason, it's just a problem over and over and over, and it's really driving me crazy because it's not something that I expect from Apple. It's not an aftermarket one. It's actually the developer box I'm using, but I know of other people that have different ones and have the same experience. So there's something there that is causing problems, not just with Final Cut, but other applications as well. And then finally, there's the issue of people that bought the mid-2018 MacBook Pro are out of luck for getting this one in an upgrade. If you paid $4,000 for that one, you can't just go trade it in and get this one and then have them upgrade you for a little bit of extra money. They just won't do it, and that's unfortunate. But that's it, and that's my thoughts and experience with this. If you have any other questions or comments, I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe and like. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.